White House Chief of Staff John F. Kelly, whose boss is well known for unique opinions about the Civil War, introduced his own hypothesis to the world last night when he blamed the war on the lack of an ability to compromise. The Washington Post has already written about what historians think of Kelly's thoughts, their assessments ranging from dangerous to kind of depressing. But the truth is, the panicky months before the Civil War were full of attempts to compromise with the rebellious South. The most popular proposal, by far, was a constitutional amendment that would have irreversibly immortalized slavery as a feature of the United States. And while supporters of this compromise, up to and including Abraham Lincoln and most of Congress, did fail to pull it off, it wasn't for lack of trying. Mass panic. The central difficulty of bargaining with secessionists, as Daniel W. Crofts writes in Lincoln and the Politics of Slavery, is that so many secessionists were hysterical. White Southerners had heard endlessly that black Republicans planned to destroy slavery and confer equal citizen rights on ex-slaves, the College of New Jersey's emeritus history professor writes in his book. So when Lincoln was elected as the first Republican president in late 1860, an extensive mass panic followed. The government is in the hands of those who are unfriendly to slavery, a U.S. senator from Georgia warned Congress the next month. For example, he prophesied not just abolition, but slave uprisings, murderings, poisonings, and revolts under Lincoln's reign. Which was absolute garbage, Crofts told the Washington Post. Lincoln hated slavery, the professor said, but the incoming president had no desire to upend the Southern slave economy, lest he fracture his young party or risk a war. Nevertheless, fear spread. And as Southern states started to secede, Unionists in the North urged Lincoln to compromise. Petitions descended on Washington from Boston, New York City, and Philadelphia, Crofts writes. The largest daily newspaper in the world, the New York Herald, implored Lincoln to strike a Union compromise that would put an end to the notion that his party wanted to exterminate the white race in the South and set the Negro free. Lincoln, it turned out, was amenable. Kelly calls Robert E. Lee an honorable man and says lack of compromise caused the Civil War. Conspiracy to compromise. While fantasies of freed slaves running rampant drove politics in the South in 1860, policymakers in Washington debated a relatively narrow issue: whether to allow slavery on the U.S. frontiers. The right to take slaves to the territories was the defining symbol of Southern equality in the Union, Crofts writes. But Republicans, Lincoln included, drew their line here. They would condone slavery where it existed, but not allow its expansion. Thurlow Weed, the politically connected editor of the Albany Journal, spent the end of 1860 publishing essays that Crofts calls trial balloons for his friends in Washington, to test whether Lincoln might be open to compromise on the frontier slavery issue. Our fathers found slavery so deeply seated, that they could not form a union without recognizing and tolerating it, Weed wrote in mid-December, according to Crofts. He advocated a widely circulated plan called the Crittenden Compromise, which would allow slavery in new Southern territories only. Weed published this essay and then hopped on a train to Springfield, Illinois, to ask President-elect Lincoln what he thought of the idea. Lincoln didn't think much of it, Crofts writes. He would not bend an inch toward them on the territories. But the historian cites evidence that Lincoln offered Weed a different sort of compromise in that meeting. It's in a December 26 letter to Lincoln from Senator William Henry Seward of New York, a high-ranking member of the Republican Party with whom Weed often conspired. Seward had been working with other senators to head off the South's secession movement. He told the president-elect that his committee's proposal was modeled off the suggestions made by you, through Mr. Weed, as I understand it. The first proposal that the Constitution should never be altered, so as to authorize Congress to abolish or interfere with slavery in the states. Lincoln's fingerprints. Seward drafted a constitutional amendment that same week, which can now be seen at the National Archives. It's short, written in immaculate cursive, and signed by outgoing President James Buchanan. And as Crofts notes, the word slavery does not appear on it even once. No amendment shall be made to the Constitution which will authorize or give to Congress the power to abolish or interfere, within any state, with the domestic institutions thereof, including that of people held to labor or service by the laws of said state. But slaves were exactly what was meant. The amendment would have assuaged slave owners' fears by forever forbid,